tonight in morality. We look forward to it.
Good evening, you all. I was just at an event with Father Connor, and I said I need to get back to talking RCIA. And he said, "What's your topic?" And I said, "Morality." He said, "It's a pretty broad topic, don't you think?" And it is. It is. So I just want to kind of touch the highlights, at least from a Catholic perspective, about what morality actually is. And I'd like to start with a passage that everybody will be familiar with, reading the Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. Familiar passage, true, that we've heard. But it's one that is certainly at a center point in terms of what the Catholic Church and our approach to the subject of morality. But what about our culture? The culture we live in has some very, very wonderful aspects to it. We all know that. We enjoy that. I think of all the issues of technology that have enhanced our lives in many ways. There's so many other areas that are wonderful about our culture. At the same time, there's a downside. There are aspects that pull us down and that really corrupt us in different ways. But one of the attitudes out there in the culture that also can be in here within our hearts is a sense that when it comes to these kinds of issues, that one opinion basically is as good as another. And so if that's our stance towards human interactions, towards morality, then we're already off to a major problem. That one opinion is as good as another. Because I can have the opinion that, in my case, it's okay if I steal, if I take something that belongs to you. That's my opinion. I think it's okay for me to take. And you're saying, well, no. My morality tells me that you shouldn't steal from me. One opinion is not as good as another. True? And I think for us, what we have to do is to look, well, why? Why isn't one as good as another? What are the bases for our coming to the conclusions we come to? But that certainly is an attitude that's very prevalent, especially when it comes to morality, to human relationships, or to many different issues that we face as a people, really throughout the world. That whole sense that when it comes to these kind of things, one is another. The whole sense, too, that nobody can tell me what's right and what's wrong. That it's really up to me to make that decision. And also that whole sense of pleasure. If it feels good, it has to be okay somehow. And so those kind of attitudes that are certainly strongly in our culture can permeate us in a profound way. And when we allow it to take root within our hearts, then there are consequences. The one area certainly is that if we're not careful, if the focus is in this direction, then that things, possessions, me, all that becomes the most important central thing about human life. That we become the center. And things that we accumulate are much more important than other human beings. That whole sense of, in order to get what you want, if you have to resort to violence, then that's okay. That whole sense of retaliation as opposed to reconciliation, compassion, certainly there. And in our culture, especially, I think in our country, there's such a individualistic spirit. And we're proud of the fact that we can pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and get it done, and we're individuals. At the same time, the reality is that we are also social by nature, and so something can get lost in the shuffle. And so these kinds of attitudes can take hold and have an effect. And all we have to do is to look at the newspaper, turn on any television station and watch the news, and we see that reflected. All of those different issues that are there that affect our economic life, our social life, our political systems. And so much of it is contrary to the gospel. Pope John Paul II, back several decades ago now, in 95, wrote a powerful encyclical called The Gospel of Life. And it really is so insightful about human relationships and about morality and about what's good and what's not. And one of the things he talked about is the culture of death and the culture of life. Now, there's some politicians that have picked up on that and I think use it towards their ends. But the imagery, I think, is powerful, that there's a culture of death and a culture of life. And our call as Christian people is to obviously enhance the culture of life. But the culture of death would be all of these things that lead us in the direction of harming relationships with one another, doing harm to ourselves, cutting God off from our lives. And when that is not only something that happens with me personally, with you all, but it becomes all of us together as a collective group, as a nation, as a world, that become a mess of our hands. And I think, I don't know if anybody would argue that we're not a mess in many ways. And so for us, how do we know what's right, what's wrong? Where do we learn that? Where does it come from? If in my opinion it's not if you're saying that my opinion is not as good as yours, or yours is not as good as mine, or whatever, how can we say that? We each have a conscience. Why is it that we're not totally able as individuals to make these judgments? And the reality is that we are one person amidst a whole community of people. And that there are moral principles that we believe, when I say we, I'm talking from a Catholic perspective, that we believe are there. They're basic moral principles that are objective, that are rooted in who we are as human persons. And that they are initially rooted in reason. And so we with using our gift of reason, without revelation, without the scriptures, using our gift of reason, we can somehow come to the conclusion that there's something not right about taking the life of someone else. There's something not right about stealing. There's something not right about infidelity. There's something, and you go down all the Ten Commandments. Somehow that's rooted in our reason and our ability to think things through, to analyze. But for us, we have not only our gift of reason, but our belief is that reason is enlightened by God's revelation that we discover in the pages of Scripture, in the tradition of our faith community. And we also have, with reason, with revelation, we also have the gift of faith. And for us, it's summed up, truly, our moral principles are summed up by looking at the life of Jesus Christ. And so, if that's the case, if we ultimately can find our moral principles in the person of Jesus, then a basic principle has to be, if we cut ourselves off from God, if we cut ourselves off from any sense of God, then we're cutting ourselves off from ourselves. Does that make sense? In other words, we have our relationship with God, and our God created us out of nothing. Our God made us in His image, and if we go through life without any connection to our Creator, we're not only not going to know who our Creator is, it's going to be hard for us to really get an accurate grasp of who that creature is, which happens to be ourselves. And so our connection to God as our Creator is very important. And so a basic moral principle is we have to stay connected. We have to stay united with the presence of God in our life. And that ultimately is summed up in the person of Christ. So for us then, we look to baptism. Baptism is the first sacrament that brings us into the body of Christ. And what we see is happening in baptism is right out of St. Paul. It means death to sin and life in God. We die to ourselves, we die to that selfishness, we die to sin, only to rise with the presence of God. Jesus is revealed in the Scriptures as the way, the truth, and the life. And each one of those words is significant. Jesus is the way. He is the path that leads us towards a point that we need to be in terms of how we live in this planet, on this earth, and ultimately our union with the Lord in eternity. And so that's significant. Jesus is the way. So when we come to trying to figure out what are our moral principles, one opinion isn't as good as another. Well, no, not necessarily. If one opinion is not particularly connected to our Creator, is not connected to the person of Christ, if it's not connected to the way that He leads us, then you're already off to a weak start in terms of the opinion. So that's what I'm trying to get at. Our belief is that the way of Christ, I am the way, the truth, and life, I am the way. The way of Christ is what leads to deeper life, and to go in the opposite direction leads to ultimately to destruction, to harm, difficulty in relationships, to misery for ourselves, and then to destruction. So for us then, we look for where do we find support for this? Where do we go to find more information about the fact that our God has created us, our God wants us to be connected, our God wants us to see Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. So we need to catechize ourselves. We need to learn. And the way we learn, and all this is connected back to moral principles. It's connected to the Beatitudes that I just read a moment ago, that many people, a number of authors will talk about the Beatitudes in a very real sense as a self-portrait of Jesus. And so if you look at those different Beatitudes, it's like taking a dark room and throwing a light in one area, a light in another. And if you take the Beatitudes and light up one and light up all in and out of them, then you can get a fuller picture. And when you look at all those different virtues, bring them together, you have the person of Christ. There are what we call cardinal virtues. Cardinal being a word that means hinge, that as the world turns, as life turns on that hinge. And they're now with us in the narthex, on the side where goodness is found, virtues are found, on the right-hand side as you're coming through. Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. And so if you look at those virtues, they're important to try to internalize in terms of our understanding about how do we come about formulating our moral values, our moral principles. So prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, obviously are important virtues to nurture. And then the theological virtues is what we call them, faith, hope, and charity. And those 7 virtues then can become a cornerstone for us in terms of knowing what is right and what is wrong, how not to behave, how not to behave. Another source of information would be the response of Jesus when the scribes and Pharisees were trying to trip him up and get him into trouble, and said, well, there are 600 and something commandments, I think, in the Old Testament. And so they go to Jesus and say, what's the most important? Well, it's almost a trick question. It's almost like, and his answer, well, to love God, love your neighbor as yourself. It's pretty basic. But that twofold command is certainly a source of inspiration so that our opinion about what is right and wrong can be more deeply rooted in the truth of God's revelation to us. And then, of course, probably the most familiar source would be the Ten Commandments, and that helps us get to who we're supposed to be. But all of this ultimately points back to the person of Jesus, and what St. Paul talks about is that life in its fullness is lived in union with the Lord. Is this making sense? I'm trying to reach it. So basically then, moral principles have to come from somewhere. And the argument of the culture is, well, moral principles come from within you, in my opinion. And what the church says is, well, no, your opinion is significant, but it has to be rooted in reality. And the reality is that there's a God, and that we're created in God's image, and that God has given us the gift of reason, that we can come to some conclusions. He's also given us a heart so that we can feel and experience it. And He's given us the Scriptures. He's given us the community. And in all of those ways, we're come to understand what those basic moral principles are. So we go back trying to further flesh this out to the book of Genesis, where the very beginning, where we are created in God's image, and that's not talking about obviously a physical kind of we look like God, but it's we're created in God's image in that God is spirit. We have spirit. God has an intellect, a will, and a gift of love. So we're created in God's image. We're able to think, to choose, to analyze, to reflect, to love. And so we have the gift of freedom. So that's it's a great gift that we have, to be created in God's image. And God gave us a conscience to help us discern, to figure out, to decide what is right and what is wrong. And He says, with that conscience, I want you to do good and to avoid evil. That's what Father Connor said when we were driving over here. You know, I said, around, he said, we're just going to tell us to do good and avoid evil. I said, well, I have to mention that, but it's going to be. Our belief is that with original sin, that something happened to the human race. And original sin for us are our first forebears, our first mothers and fathers, who had the gift of reason, symbolized by Adam and Eve. That our first, the first human persons, for whatever reason, chose to sin. They chose to use their gift of freedom and to use it in a way they shouldn't have used it. And so they took a perfectly placid, beautiful world and threw a huge boulder into it. And an image that has made sense to me is it's like a very placid lake that is absolutely beautiful. And if you go and stand over that lake and look into it, you can see your reflection almost like a mirror. But with original sin, it was like our first forebears took a huge boulder, threw it into that lake, and it caused such turmoil that it continues to this day. The original sin did a number on all of us. And so if we go and peer into that same body of water, it's all distorted because we can't see who we are by looking at that truth. In other words, it would be. And so original sin then was that original sin, the first sin, that significantly altered our relationship with our God as human persons. And in doing that, we became wounded. We became subject to error. We became victims in some ways of our emotions and our passions. All of those situations, we were inclined towards evil. And with all that happening, the realization that, boy, we need help. We basically need a Savior. We need a Messiah. We need someone to get us out of this. And so, with the original sin that messed everything up, human persons come along after, that we take maybe little pebbles and boulders ourselves and kind of pitch it in. And so you've got a lot of turmoil that is in the world in which when new life comes. And so for us then, it is through Christ that we are saved from that. And so with baptism, our belief is that we are free from original sin, but we're not free from the effects of it. And so as we go through life, we still experience temptations. We still experience falling. We still experience the suffering and the travails of life. And we need the Lord in our lives. And so our understanding is that Jesus has come to give us new life, has given us the Spirit to help us to understand this and analyze it, and reflect upon it. And we're called to union with the Lord here and in eternity. And so our moral principles are rooted in Genesis, among other places. It's rooted in the fact that we're created in God's image, and that has a lot of ramifications. So again, going back to, well, this is my opinion. Well, it's important that opinion be rooted in reality, and our understanding that what is the most real thing in life is the presence of God. Even though we can't see God, that becomes a key central factor in life. And rooting ourselves in God, then we listen to what does the Lord have to say to us, and that's where those four principles ultimately will come from. The Beatitudes, like I mentioned, are kind of a self-portrait of Jesus in his own preaching. They're filled with paradoxes, and it's reminiscent to me of that prayer of St. Francis that sounds kind of counterintuitive. You know, it's in giving that you receive. It's in forgiving the other that you were forgiven. It is in all those kind of paradoxes that kind of unfold in relationships. We find all of that rooted in those Beatitudes. Any questions? Any objections? Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of strange, but so if we have the freedom to make our own decisions as far as sin goes, what I guess is the Catholic Church's stance as far as how much influence evil or Satan has on our ability to choose?
Okay. Did you have a question? That God gave us the gift of freedom that we are there to use. And again, our understanding is that the gift of freedom is given to us so that we can make choices that make us more into the people God has called us to be. And I'm going to get exactly to what you said. But at Mass this morning, I had a Mass with the school kids. Wednesday, the whole school comes together, and the scriptures, at least as I read it, the first reading was dealing with the whole issue of slavery to sin. And so I kind of built my homily around that and talking about the fact that and again, I was talking to kids, so but I was basically talking about addictions. I was talking about all the different pitfalls that can be there for us that makes us slaves. So for them, I was talking about, habits and developing a habit of a lack of kindness. We become enslaved to our being mean. A lot of different examples of that. And so for us then, to exercise our freedom is a great gift we have, but it's hard work. And because we are victims of that, the effects of original sin. Our understanding about evil is that it comes in different forms. That the church has a kind of traditional definition that evil comes in the world, the flesh, and the devil. And so we certainly believe in the power of evil and that there's a personal power. There is a Satan. There is a devil. So that's a reality. And the devil has his minions. But the world also also can be a source of great temptation for us, kind of in concert with the forces of evil. And the flesh, our own weaknesses, whatever they may be, that where we don't discipline ourselves in the ways that we could. And so evil can get at us in a lot of different ways. And sometimes I find situations where people are terrified of the devil, and I think it's an appropriate response for us to be. But I don't think it's helpful to stay in a state of fear eternally, because the Lord came to give us peace. And so it seems to me, sometimes, every once in a while, gratefully it doesn't happen very often, every once in a while you get a phone call, and I think my house is haunted. There's something going on. And that could be for real. You see television shows where it's kind of real. But, people are very disturbed, that there's something wrong, there's something going on. And my first question is, because usually I don't know the people directly, my first question is, well, do you pray? Well, no, I haven't been doing that. Well, that's a place to start, because the relationship with God is what's going to counter evil. And sometimes we have the sense that we got to fight it off. And oftentimes, I think the better strategy is to turn to the Lord and ask Him to fight it for us. Does that make sense? Rather than that way you're not so preoccupied with your own power or lack thereof, but you're preoccupied with the presence of the Lord in your life. And the Lord is the one that's going to deal with any forces of evil. And so it comes back to really what you were saying, that the nature of the human person and the gift of freedom. We have the ability to think, to choose, and to analyze. So in that way we are like God. And we also have free will. And one of the things the Lord attached to that free will was responsibility for the consequences of our actions. And that's what those of us who are involved in forming young people, those of you who are parents, I'm sure you spend hours dealing with this, trying to help young people understand the consequences of their actions. And then how easy it is for us as adults to forget the consequences of our actions. It's a lifelong struggle for us to come to kind of get it. But the reality is that God gives us free will, and there's no way we can escape the consequences. They are there, and we're responsible for that. So for us, the gift of freedom is a power, it's an ability that we have that's rooted in our reason, also in our will, our ability to make decisions, to make a decision to do this, to do that. And if you think about it, by the exercise of our free will, our life is shaped. Step by step by step. So we can look back at our life and we might think of some major events that might have been a major turning point for good or for ill. But the reality is that our lives, there's a thread that runs through it all. And it's usually an exercise of our free will in one way or another, and accepting the consequences of our decisions. And so you can see how important it is that to bind ourselves closely to the Lord, because it is His values and His stance towards life that we see in those Beatitudes that gives us the best shot at knowing peace and serenity. And I think in so many situations where we can get ourselves so bound up in complex situations that are not of God, that it's just as clear as day, that's not a path towards freedom, towards peace. It's really a path towards slavery. So we have the gift of freedom that we can use to continue to be free and to really come to know who we are and to become closer to that vision. Or we can use our gift of freedom, ironically, to begin to let go of that freedom and become a slave. Become a slave of whatever the ism might be that we struggle with. So the more one does what is good, the freer that person becomes. And the church's stance is that true freedom is found in the service of what is good and just. You know, I've talked to so many kids, adults, and it's interesting when people are truly altruistic and giving and loving and sacrificing. There's such a tremendous, it has nothing to do with things. It's such a tremendous sense of peace. So there's a program called Search for Christian Maturity that juniors and seniors in high school have. And I've talked to young adults over the years, teenagers, who are leaders. So a kid can make a search, and sometimes they're invited to come back to be a leader and to help put the thing on. And I've talked to kids after their leader. I said, how did it go? And the response generally would be, well, it was different than being a participant because I had responsibilities, but it was just great. You know, I said, was it hard work? Oh, it was a lot of hard work. Working and talk, and I had to be responsible. But it was just such a good feeling for being able to do that for people. And I've talked to adults who are involved in teaching, and as their leader, their CO, which is an adult experience of a weekend retreat. And then the person that goes to the soup kitchen every Monday and works, you know, there's a sacrifice of oneself only to discover a real sense of serenity and peace in giving. You know, that it's in giving that you receive. So I think that's what this is about. The more we do that which is of God, the more we experience true freedom. And the more we choose to move away from the Lord, the more we move ourselves into some form of slavery to whatever it is we don't want to be enslaved to. But it's hard to get out of it. You know, a major issue today certainly is pornography. And again, talking to young people who might be on the growing up years and tremendously tempted. You know, I just find myself urging them, do not go there, because it's like the black hole that a person sinks into and they become a slave. And they want to get out of it but don't know how. So I mean, that's just, there are all kinds of examples. You can go drugs, alcohol, I mean, down the list of things that can be, of course there's no virtue in pornography, but alcohol or other things that can be used in moderation. But we're going over that edge, then you can get entrapped. So that's the slavery to that which is not of God. I know this talk is I took a lot of it out of John Paul II and his encyclical. But a lot of it seems, I would think, kind of theoretical. But if you stop to think, I think it can be very real in terms of the way we live our lives. For us, then, we come to what I want to conclude with, and that is, what is sin? What is it? And there's a definition that's there. Sin is an utterance, a deed, a desire, contrary to the eternal law. That's what St. Augustine said. It's an offense against God. It's an act contrary to reason. It wounds our nature. It enters into relationships. I found it interesting. It's contrary to reason. When you stop to think about it, whatever kind of sins that we can think of, it really is against reason. It doesn't. And how many times have we heard ourselves or others say, it just didn't make any sense? That's what happened. That's what occurred. And so I think that is significant. So sin is something that destroys or goes against who we are as human persons. The beauty of what God has created, and we basically taint it in some way. So we have original sin, I talked about, then the personal sins that we can kind of throw into there. And for us, the Catholic Church kind of takes an approach about, and kind of a discussion about the gravity of sin. That sins can be reflected upon in terms of how grave or less grave they are. And there's some traditional terms that are oftentimes used in Catholic circles that I think are rooted in Scripture, certainly rooted in tradition of the church, and I think rooted in human experience. We have what our sin basically is a disobedience of the Lord, or an offense to God, or destruction in some way of human relationships. And those things that are sins, it's not that Jesus said, I think I'm going to tell people they can't do these things. Or the church sits around and says, I think we need to tell people these things are wrong. Rather, it springs from who we are. It springs from our very nature. And so it doesn't make any sense to go against who we are. But we do it all the time because of that temptation that we experience and the reality of the original sin that has occurred. So we have what's sometimes called mortal sin. And mortal sin comes from the Latin word mors, which means deadly. So a mortal sin would be a major sin that deals death to our relationship with the Lord. Not that the Lord has gone anywhere, but that we basically have closed the door before, and we do it in a very profound way. There are lesser sins that a Latin word is used for that as well, venial. And so venial sins are lesser sins. I think it was St. Augustine at one time used the analogy, trying to explain it to people, of the difference in a marital relationship. That in a marriage between a husband and a wife who deeply love each other, if I doubt that any married couples here ever squabble or argue, true? But sometimes married couples squabble, argue, have little disagreements. Those would be small little disturbances in the relationship. And so, using the analogy of sin, not that all those are necessarily sin, but what I'm saying is that disturbance in relationship is venial, it's lesser. On the other hand, to introduce adultery into a marriage is big time, major. It could possibly disrupt that whole relationship. And so that, I think, is a clear example. To gossip about somebody behind their back in a loud kind of way is one thing. To deliberately choose to make stuff up and destroy someone's reputation is big time. True? In other words, so they're lesser and they're more serious. And so the church recognizes that. And also, if you go into the narthex, on one side of the 7 virtues, on the other side of the 7 vices, it's interesting. The church was built in the 50s, and some of the windows, all the windows over the years, because of the way they were made back then, and there's been some corruption, and they needed to be refurbished. And there are 14 of those windows, and at least on all the sides. And we had them analyzed because we were concerned about safety. We wanted to make sure that people were safe, that some windstorm wouldn't get anyone in. And so we had them analyzed, and it's interesting. 2 different firms did it, and they both came to the same conclusion. The window that was the worst was the one with the devil in it. And the second one was the devil. Now, I need to lose the weight of this. but the devil and gluttony were the first 2. And then all the other windows on that side were corrupted, and less so than the virtues. But we're going to do all 14 of them in some years and get them all streamlined up to they should be. One other area is not only are there personal sins, but there are evil structures, social sin they could be called. And certainly maybe a perfect example of that for us in our nation would be racism, prejudice. And, we are so deeply ingrained with that. I mean, we've got our whole history. In one way or another, it has had to deal with relationships among races. And so it certainly has afflicted us. So you could say that would be an example of an institutionalized evil, that can kind of transcend the individual, but taints us all. So there might be an occasion when a thought goes through a person's mind who would never have a prejudice. It's from the structures that can hold us down. So there are a lot of ways that we can be brought down. And the point of it all, I think, is the way we're brought up and the way we're encouraged to grow is through our relationship with the Lord. So again, moral principles are rooted ultimately in Jesus Christ and in the fact that we are created in the Lord's image. That we give the basic principles through our tradition and through the scriptures. And they are beautifully come together in the Beatitudes, the commandments, and the great command to love God and love our neighbor and love ourselves. And so all of that makes the fact that all of us we have to form our conscience, but our conscience needs to be formed in light of reality, which, from a Catholic perspective, reality is those basic gifts that we have, the use of reason and then the light of revelation. So that's kind of an overview of a subject that can be talked about for years. I want to summarize it in an hour. So I hope that's helpful. And any other questions? Yes, sir.
So if someone comes to confession and says, well, I thought my husband and I were and patient part, and how do you deal with this?
Let's say it one more time. A fellow comes to confession and says, I got in this trouble with my wife, and I pushed her off a cliff. What was the other?
And then they go to confession and they tell you about it. So clearly it's a mortal sin.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Maybe that never happened. So someone comes and confesses something like that, then obviously that would have both, and then this will be interesting when we get into the sacrament of reconciliation, because what happens in the confessional, what happens in that sacrament is between the priest and the penitent forever, and you can't divulge any of that. So basically, if that happened to me, what I would try to do would be to make sure that the person was genuinely sorry for killing his wife, throwing her off the cliff. But I would also say to her that you need, and again, how I did this would be, I didn't really think it through and pray through very quickly, but I think it would be, I think it's important that that person accept responsibility, not only in asking the Lord to forgive, but also accept the consequences of what that person has done in the civil world. I mean, I can't go to the police and say, hey, you might check this fellow out. But I can strongly urge that person, it's extremely important that you come forward and make it known. I mean, I can't force that, but yeah, that's how I would handle that.
So,
Yes, sir.
have you done an exorcism?
Have I done an exorcism? No, I don't. There are people that are, and I don't even know who it would be, but I know if there was a situation where I thought there was definitely a need for an exorcist, I would call the bishop, and he would probably get me in contact with some priest. Maybe it's not from around here, but somebody that would have that gift or that commission. But I've not, no, I have not. I have been involved in situations of praying for, I can think of one particularly, of praying for a person who I really wondered what is going on, because it went beyond just someone being disturbed. There was just a lot of the things you would see in a movie, and then eventually the person calmed. So to this day, I don't know what really was going on, but the person since received medical help and other kinds of help. But you just wonder. So that in situations where I've wondered, am I looking into the face of Satan, literally in this situation, or is this a mental distress? It's hard to know sometimes. I guess it's hard to know all the time. And that's why if you really were convinced that, gosh, there's something going on, that you would need to have a professional exorcist. So, I mean, it's a couple of situations like that where I've prayed intensely for a person, wondering, what am I going to do with that person? Relationship or whatever. Yes?
Has anyone ever come to confession and you think they really aren't sorry for what they've done, so you can't give them penalty?
It's kind of beyond my experience, but theoretically, yeah. There are times when, someone came to confession and said, I'm married, I have 3 children, and I commit adultery once a week, and I have no intention of changing. I'll stop. I would say, well, and I would try to be polite and nice about it. My basic question would be, well, why are you here? Because it doesn't make any sense. That an authentic confession has to bring with it a contrite heart and a purpose of amendment, which means I'm going to change. I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to try to move in a better direction. Not that you predict the future or think that you're somehow going to be perfect, but you at least have the desire to move in the right direction. So yeah, theoretically, if someone came and there was no contrition whatsoever, then the priest would be obligated to say, I'll keep praying for you. Absolution is not the picture because it doesn't mean anything. Absolution means something, but you're not of a mindset or a heart set to receive. So that's how. But usually when a person comes to the sacrament, they're there because they want to deal with it.
Yeah, there's just kind of like this, if you're Catholic, you can sing, you just go to confession, and it's all, that kind of stigma about it.
Yeah, in other words, the whole thing about, I can go ahead and do this and not go to confession. Yeah, that's not good. and that can become part of the mindset. But that's not good because there's a lot of presumption there. That confession, reconciliation is not like going to a car wash. There has to be something deeper. There's something that has to be going on inside of you to really be sorry. Yes.
Pope recently gave an interview and he talked about individuals fighting good and evil as they perceive them. And I was curious what your thoughts. It almost seemed a little, and I didn't read the whole interview, there were just a number of excerpts. It seems almost like that toes the line of sort of moral relativism that we're sort of talking against right now. And I was wondering what your thoughts on maybe the entirety of those sorts of statements.
Okay, now tell me again. Say it again exactly.
He said it's up to the individual to fight good and evil as though they perceive them. And not really in an absolutist sense, but almost in a relative sense, and that can mean so many different things. I was curious what your thoughts were on just that general message, and if it were taken maybe out of context or some things were left out that maybe would have been relevant to that statement.
Yeah, I'm not sure what part of that lengthy interview that was in, but my guess would be it probably was connected somehow to the area when it was on that conscience, and that our conscience is a precious gift God has given to us, and we have an obligation to use it and perform it well, and then to discern what's going on in our lives. So I think he's probably talking about some kind of personal discernment. In other words, that if something traumatic or evil is intruding upon a person, that they try to, in the end, only they are going to be able to discern exactly what's happening. I think that might be what he's talking about. And so let's say a person is developing a tremendous animosity or anger towards a person or a group of people. Only that person is going to be able to analyze and discern in their conscience, what is this about? Why am I doing this? You can seek help and guidance from other people to kind of reflect back and help you get to it. But in the end, it's that person's own personal reflection and conscience that they come to the conclusion, I am doing this because I'm insecure, I'm doing this because I don't like the race that person belongs to, I'm doing this because, and so only that person can come to those conclusions. I think that might be what it is. Yes, sir.
Two-part question. What's
How
your
about
advice?
two-part answer?
What's your advice to counsel for anybody here, including me, that my personal view or my personal belief is in conflict with the teaching of the Catholic Church on a specific morality teaching?
Okay.
And are there any teachings of the Church on the line morality that you show?
Okay. Loaded questions.
And we won't be taking, this is being videotaped, right?
Good job, Mike.
World Wide Web, I'm afraid. Now, let's go back to that first one.
What's your advice and counsel?
Okay.
People that struggle with specific
And then personally.
teaching of the Church.
I think what's important is that there are things that are basic and central. And then there are things as you take that basic and central thing and go further out, it becomes more open, optional, you know. And so that's where, when you start moving out from the core, that's where you end up having people that are perceived as very liberal, very conservative, very much in the middle. They disagree on different issues for different reasons. But if a person is in the center saying, I don't believe in the three persons of the Blessed Trinity, that's big time. That's a problem, major problem. I don't believe in the sacraments. I don't believe Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. I mean, those would be core beliefs. But then there's some other things out here that, should we have the new translation or not? We went through a new translation of the Mass a couple years ago. Well, that's not core to anything.
What about the stuff that's more in the middle there, like, say, birth control?
Birth control. I think the person has an obligation in issues such as that to learn what the church teaches and why it teaches what it teaches, and to reflect upon all the ramifications involved. And then they have to use their conscience. But see, part of the issue is people can use these, you know, I've got my conscience, I make my own decision. Well, yes and no. We have an obligation, if we're going to be part of a Christian community, to soak in the basic values and beliefs that we're taught. And so once all the information is there in our heart and we come to a clearer understanding of why the church teaches what it does, and it's something that we have personal difficulty with, then you've got to follow your heart. You've got to do, but you've got to be careful that you're not rationalizing, you're not finding an easy way out. Does that make sense? In terms of moral beliefs, any questions that I would have would be along the lines of, I think, more discipline type things. You know, I have been very personally. I grew up in the '60s, and I was a drug priest in the '70s, and of course those decades are disparaged tremendously oftentimes. But I enjoyed them very much, and it was a very exciting time, I felt, in the church, right after the Second Vatican Council, and there was so much hope and excitement and joy, and I think John Paul and Benedict brought tremendous gifts to the church in terms of charisma with John Paul. Benedict's mind is brilliant, and what he has offered to us theologically. But I have been thrilled with Francis, you know, in terms of, and trying to go to your question, is that he seems not to be frightened of ambiguity. Does that make sense? He seems excited by reflecting upon the human condition and meeting people where they are. And so I think he's saying to us, there's a lot of gray out there, as well as the black and white. And so I have found that energizing, if that makes any sense. And but again, I've always seen myself, I answered a personal question you asked me, I always see myself as kind of in the middle of the left and the right. You know, because I think there's so much wisdom that's that's there in the mainstream of the church. And I think it's in the centers where we find this. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my experience. Yes, ma'am.
What do you do with like really controversial topics? I guess it's kind of a heavy question, but with abortion and the church being, pro-life, and for anyone that is pro-life, with the gray area as far as rape, I mean, where do you draw the line to say that?
Okay, that's a real good example, and like for example with abortion again, and we will be talking about that particular issue on another occasion. But again, it has to be rooted in principle, and where do these beliefs come from? So take the abortion issue, is that the church can be portrayed on the abortion issue as being part of the right-wing fringe. Now, the headline of the paper this morning was, boy, we're making headway with our death penalty. Well, the church is opposed to that too. We'd be part of the left-wing fringe. So the church is, we try to be consistent with our principles. But with abortion, when looking at a person's struggle for God and trying to discern stuff, there's a lot of gray. With abortion, with the churches using these principles, I don't know how much gray. I don't think there's a whole lot of gray in that. Our belief is that from the moment of conception, there's human life. And if we truly believe that, then what choice do we have but to resist the taking of that human life under any circumstances? And so oftentimes I think they will use rape and incest as a wedge issue to, well, surely we can't be close to that, abortion in those cases. How can you be that lacking in mercy? How can you? But the reality is that if the child is that child is a human life, then that child has a right to live. And so the church's teaching is consistent, and then the other thing that's often said in terms of the church is that, well, you are with people to get them born that you don't care about afterwards. And that's just a bold-faced lie, because there's so much you can look to with the Catholic Church and with other Christian churches too, that do all sorts of things to help people deal with that issue after birth is given. And then also, I think you'll find with the church, and this is again something Francis emphasizes, is the compassion. And so that's why we had the lady a few weeks ago, if y'all were here that particular weekend, with Rachel Spender, talking about women and men too, who have been caught up in abortion. How do you deal with that afterwards? And the church is there to embrace that person, help them work through it, and move on. So I think there's a lot of consistency and all there. So I don't know if I answered your question. If you're talking about, let's say, a discipline of the church, that's one thing. In other words, when I was growing up, we couldn't eat meat on Friday. And now we can eat meat on Friday, except during that, actually mentioned Good Friday. All right, those are disciplines that can be changed. We can have all kind of different opinions about that. Abortion would be one of those central things that there's not a Any more questions? I think y'all are ready for a break. Or not a break, but what are we going to do next? I think Eileen's going to come forward and sing a song.